The morning sun filtered softly through the tall windows of Riverside Cafe, casting long shadows across the restaurant's polished wood floors. The rich aroma of freshly baked bread and brewing coffee filled the air, creating a warm and inviting atmosphere in what was one of downtown's most popular spots for brunch. Michelle Williams, only 24 years old, adjusted her black apron and checked her notepad once again. Despite her youthful age, she carried the weight of big dreams on her shoulders, the kind of dreams that were hard to carry, but essential if she wanted to become something more than the life she was currently leading. Michelle had always known that medical school wasn't going to be cheap, and with her single mother working tirelessly to support both of them, Michelle knew that she couldn't rely on anyone else to get her through. Every shift, every customer, every tip mattered, bringing her one step closer to the future she envisioned. She had grown up seeing the sacrifices her mother had made, and the last thing she wanted was for those sacrifices to go unappreciated. She dreamed of a life where she could repay her mother's unwavering support, her mother who had put everything on hold for Michelle's future. Today, as Michelle stepped into her section, she was prepared for the busy lunch rush. She glanced around the bustling restaurant, where the tables were filling up fast. Jenny, another waitress, passed by carrying a tray of steaming plates. "Michelle, your section is filling up quickly today," she called out as she hurried past. The big table in the corner just got seated. "Looks like some kind of business meeting." Michelle nodded, took a deep breath, and readied herself for another hectic shift. She had grown accustomed to handling difficult customers and navigating the sometimes volatile moods of high-powered professionals. Today, her section would include a particularly important table, one occupied by Sarah Chen and her marketing team. Sarah, dressed in a crisp navy blue suit that likely cost more than Michelle's monthly rent, was sitting at the head of the table, already commanding attention. Surrounded by 5 of her team members, she had just closed a major deal, the Peterson account, and had come to celebrate at Riverside Cafe, which was known for its exclusivity and fine dining. "We'll show those hospital networks what real marketing looks like," Sarah said loudly, her voice carrying across the restaurant as she shuffled through some papers in her designer briefcase. "Next week's presentation to Metropolitan Health Network is our ticket to the big leagues." Michelle approached the table with her usual warm, professional smile, ready to greet her guests. "Good morning, welcome to Riverside Cafe," she said cheerfully. "My name is Michelle and I'll be taking care of you today." As she placed water glasses on the table, Michelle couldn't help but notice the way Sarah barely looked up from her phone. She waved her hand dismissively at the glass in front of her. "We'll need sparkling water, not this tap water," she said curtly, pushing her glass away slightly. "And make sure it's properly chilled this time. The service here has been going downhill lately." Michelle, ever the professional, maintained her composure, not allowing Sarah's sharp tone to shake her. "Of course, ma'am, I'll bring that right away," she replied, her voice calm and steady. "Would you like to hear about our specials while I'm here?" "Just bring the sparkling water first," Sarah interrupted, waving her hand impatiently. "We'll decide what we want when we're ready." As Michelle walked away, she overheard Sarah's voice rise, loud enough to carry across the restaurant. "You'd think they could hire more competent staff at these prices," Sarah remarked, clearly irritated. Michelle's face remained calm, but the comments stung. Over the years, Michelle had learned not to let such remarks affect her work. She had endured worse throughout her 3 years of serving at Riverside Cafe, and had learned to focus solely on her goal, becoming a doctor. There was no room for distraction. Her dreams were too big to allow her to be knocked off course by negativity. As Michelle made her way back to the bar to grab the sparkling water, she didn't notice the distinguished-looking African-American man seated at the table next to Sarah's group. Dr. James Thompson, the CEO of Metropolitan Health Network, was having a quiet lunch with 2 board members. He had chosen Riverside Cafe specifically for its peaceful ambience, hoping to have a private conversation about upcoming projects. He hadn't expected the scene unfolding just a few feet away. Dr. Thompson had noticed Michelle right away, not just because she was one of the few black staff members at the upscale restaurant, but because he recognized her from the hospital's volunteer program. For the past year, Michelle had been volunteering every Saturday morning in the pediatric ward, where she would read to sick children and assist the nursing staff. Her calm demeanor, compassion, and natural ability to connect with patients had impressed him, and he had recently become her mentor in the hospital's Diversity Initiative program. Now, as he observed the exchange between Michelle and Sarah, Dr. Thompson felt a rising concern. He had seen these kinds of microaggressions before. He had witnessed how subtle forms of discrimination could erode a person's confidence, particularly in the workplace. He saw the way Sarah was treating Michelle, not as an equal but as someone beneath her. Dr. Thompson, with his decades of experience in healthcare administration, could recognize these signs immediately. He watched as Sarah's dismissive attitude continued to unfold, and he knew that the situation needed to be addressed. Meanwhile, Michelle, unaware of Dr. Thompson's watchful eyes, returned to Sarah's table with the sparkling water. As she placed the chilled bottles in front of the group, Sarah continued her tirade. She picked up her glass, examining it with exaggerated care. "Well, at least these glasses are clean," she remarked loudly to her team as if it were some sort of small mercy. "Though I suppose we should be grateful for that." The tension in the air was palpable, and Michelle stood patiently, holding her notepad, waiting for the team to finally place their orders. Sarah, of course, didn't make it easy. "I'll have the Caesar salad," she announced without looking up from her phone. "Make sure the dressing is on the side and the chicken better be fresh, not like last time." Of course, there had never been a last time. This was Sarah's first visit to Riverside Cafe, but she enjoyed making her servers feel inferior, no matter how unfounded the criticism was. As each team member placed their order, Michelle could sense their discomfort. Many of them, clearly embarrassed by Sarah's treatment of her, offered Michelle apologetic smiles when their boss wasn't looking. Tom, the newest member of the marketing team, even whispered a quiet sorry as he handed his menu back to Michelle. She smiled back but said nothing, knowing that there was little she could do but continue with her job and maintain professionalism. At the next table, Dr. Thompson, who had been pretending to focus on his lunch conversation, was absorbed in the unfolding drama at Sarah's table. He had seen Michelle handle difficult situations before, both at the hospital and here at Riverside Cafe. He had witnessed firsthand how Michelle had calmed an angry parent in the pediatric ward just last weekend with such grace and compassion that the nurses had remarked on her natural ability to diffuse tense situations. Now, as he watched her handle Sarah's sharp words with a quiet strength, he felt a deep sense of admiration for her poise. The tension in the air was thickening as Sarah continued to complain about every little thing. "And what exactly is taking so long with our drinks?" she snapped as Michelle disappeared behind the bar to get their drinks, though Michelle had been gone for less than 3 minutes. Michelle took a deep breath and quickly began arranging the drinks on her tray, her hands trembling slightly. Despite the anxiety she felt, her face remained calm, a mask she had perfected over the years. She was determined not to show any sign of weakness. She knew that the real battle wasn't about the drinks or the food, it was about something much more important: her future. Every shift, every interaction, and every challenge was one step closer to her dream of becoming a doctor. She would not let anyone, no matter how rude or dismissive, stand in the way of that dream. The atmosphere in Riverside Cafe shifted in an instant. What had started as an ordinary, albeit tense, lunch had now escalated into something much more uncomfortable. Michelle Williams, who had been navigating the subtle hostility of Sarah Chen and her marketing team all afternoon, was now caught in the middle of a full-blown outburst. Michelle's hands shook slightly as she carefully placed the drinks down in front of Sarah and her team. The clink of glass echoed across the table as she moved with practiced grace, making sure to avoid spilling any more than she had already. But just as she set the final glass on the table, Sarah's phone buzzed loudly, breaking the fragile silence. The unexpected sound startled Michelle, and her hand jerked involuntarily. A few drops of water splashed onto the white tablecloth, landing near Sarah's elbow. The reaction was immediate and explosive. "Are you serious?" Sarah exploded, her voice sharp and filled with disdain. She pushed her chair back dramatically, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. "This is a silk blazer. Do you have any idea how much this cost? Probably more than you make in a month." Her voice rose with every word, and the entire restaurant seemed to pause as if holding its breath. The energy in the room shifted from the usual buzz of conversation to a stunned silence. Diners at nearby tables stopped talking, their eyes drawn to the unfolding drama. Jenny, a fellow waitress who had been working nearby, froze mid-step as she carried a tray of empty plates. The tension was palpable, and Michelle could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on her. But she remained calm, keeping her expression neutral, despite the sting of Sarah's words. "I am so sorry, ma'am," Michelle said quietly, her voice calm and controlled. "It's just water, but I'll clean it up right away." Her words were soft, and her posture was professional as she reached for a stack of extra napkins. "Just water?" Sarah's voice rose even higher, and she looked incredulously at Michelle, as if the very suggestion of it being just water was a grave insult. "Just water. This is exactly the kind of incompetence I'm talking about. This is why people like you, she stopped herself, her eyes narrowing with barely contained frustration. The words that followed, though unspoken, were clear enough to everyone around the table. The meaning was unmistakable. Sarah's implied insult hung heavy in the air, and the discomfort in the room grew palpable. Dr. James Thompson, sitting at the table nearby with two colleagues, watched the exchange with growing concern. He had seen similar comments throughout his career, but something about the way Sarah was speaking to Michelle, so dismissively and with such entitlement, bothered him deeply. The subtle racial undertones of her words were not lost on him, and he knew exactly what Sarah was implying. He felt his grip tighten around his fork, the tension in his hand mirroring the tension in the room. His two lunch companions, both board members from Metropolitan Health Network, exchanged knowing glances. The situation had taken a turn and they knew it. Marcus, the restaurant manager, appeared at the table just in time to prevent things from escalating further. He had been watching from across the room, sensing that the situation might get out of hand, and had decided it was time to intervene. "Is everything okay here?" Marcus asked, trying to sound composed, though there was a hint of urgency in his tone. "No, everything is not okay," Sarah snapped, her face red with anger. "Your waitress just ruined my designer blazer, and her attitude is completely unprofessional. I demand to speak to the owner." Michelle remained silent, her hands clasped in front of her apron as she stood, trying to appear as composed as possible despite the rising tension in the room. Her thoughts wandered for just a moment, back to her morning anatomy exam, which she had aced despite working a double shift the day before. She thought of her mother, who had raised her alone while juggling two jobs, teaching her to hold her head high no matter what. She wouldn't let Sarah see her flinch. She wouldn't let this woman break her. "I am so sorry for any inconvenience," Marcus began, attempting to calm Sarah, but she cut him off immediately. "Sorry doesn't cut it," she declared, standing up to her full height, her tone condescending. "I run a successful marketing agency. We handle accounts worth millions. I cannot believe the level of service in this establishment. First, the water isn't sparkling enough, then she can't even serve drinks without spilling them. What's next? Are we going to have to wait an hour for our food?" At the table next to Sarah's, Dr. Thompson, who had been calmly eating his lunch up until now, slowly wiped his mouth with his napkin, placing it down on the table with deliberate care. He had heard enough. He had witnessed enough to know that this was a moment that required action. As he prepared to stand up, his phone screen lit up with a notification. He glanced down at it and saw an email from Sarah Chen's marketing agency, requesting a meeting for the following week regarding next week's big presentation to Metropolitan Health Network. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Dr. Thompson knew that the story was about to take an unexpected turn. Sarah had no idea that her next client was sitting just a few feet away, watching everything unfold. Sarah meanwhile was still fuming. The few drops of water that had splashed onto her blazer had become, in her mind, a major crisis that needed immediate attention. As she reached into her designer purse, pulling out her business card, she slapped it down on the table with force. "I want the owner to know exactly who I am," she said haughtily. "Sarah Chen, CEO of Premier Marketing Solutions. We handle accounts worth millions of dollars, and this is how you treat valuable customers." Michelle remained still, her face calm despite the storm raging around her. She thought about the many difficult situations she had faced in her life, growing up with a single mother, working long hours to put herself through school, and dealing with more than her fair share of rude and difficult customers. She had learned to keep her composure in moments like these. She had learned that no matter how hard it got, she would rise above it. "I treat all my customers with the same respect and care," Michelle said, her voice steady and professional. "I'm sorry you feel. You've received poor service, but I assure you, this was an accident." Sarah wasn't having it. "Save it," she interrupted sharply. "I don't need assurances from someone like you. I need to speak to whoever thought it was a good idea to hire people who can't even carry a water glass properly." Before Michelle could respond, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me," Dr. Thompson said, standing up from his table and walking toward Sarah's group. His presence was commanding, his tall, distinguished frame and impeccable suit making Sarah's designer outfit look ordinary in comparison. Sarah turned, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "This is a private matter, sir. I'm dealing with an issue of poor service," she said, her voice still dripping with anger. Dr. Thompson smiled, but his eyes were serious. "Oh, I think this is very much my business, Miss Chen," he replied smoothly. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his own business card and placed it gently on the table, his expression never wavering. For the first time, Sarah's confidence faltered. She looked down at the card and then back at Dr. Thompson, recognizing the name on it. She knew exactly who he was now, and the realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave. The balance had shifted. The air in Riverside Cafe was thick with tension, and the weight of the moment hung heavily on everyone in the room. What had started as a minor incident, a few drops of water spilled onto a designer blazer, had quickly spiraled into a confrontation that would change the course of several lives. At the center of it all stood Michelle Williams, the young waitress who had been humiliated by Sarah Chin, the CEO of Premier Marketing Solutions. But as the confrontation unfolded, the tables began to turn in a way no one could have predicted. Michelle had remained calm throughout Sarah's outburst, her professional mask firmly in place despite the sting of the words hurled in her direction. But it was clear that the tide had shifted the moment Dr. James Thompson, CEO of Metropolitan Health Network, revealed his identity. He had been sitting nearby, quietly observing the entire scene, and now he had decided to intervene, not just for Michelle, but for the broader lesson that needed to be taught. As he stood up and approached Sarah's table, his presence seemed to fill the entire restaurant. He was tall, distinguished, and impeccably dressed, his very appearance making Sarah's designer outfit seem ordinary in comparison. Sarah, still fuming from the previous exchange, turned her eyes toward Dr. Thompson with annoyance, clearly unprepared for what was about to happen. "I believe we have a meeting scheduled for next week regarding your company handling our marketing needs," Dr. Thompson said, his voice smooth and calm. His words landed like a bombshell. The color drained from Sarah's face as she read the business card he handed her, her mouth opening and closing but no words coming out. She was suddenly paralyzed by the realization of who was standing in front of her, and the full weight of her actions began to hit her. This was the CEO of Metropolitan Health Network, the very company her agency had been courting for a major marketing contract. And now, in a matter of minutes, her arrogance and poor judgment had likely destroyed any chance of securing that contract. But Dr. Thompson wasn't finished. He had more to say, and Sarah was about to learn a valuable lesson in respect, dignity, and the consequences of judging people based on appearances. "Michelle," Dr. Thompson continued, turning to the waitress with a warm smile, "how are your medical school applications coming along? The letter of recommendation I wrote for you highlighted your exceptional work in our pediatric volunteer program. Your ability to handle difficult situations with grace and professionalism is exactly what we look for in future doctors." The restaurant fell completely silent. All eyes were now on Michelle, who stood taller and straighter, a small smile breaking through her professional mask. Her team members, who had been watching the exchange from their seats, now looked at her with new respect and understanding. Jenny, the waitress working nearby, had her hand over her mouth trying to hide her smile. They had all witnessed difficult customers in their time, but never had they seen such perfect karma unfold right before their eyes. Michelle, for her part, remained calm and poised, her face betraying only a hint of the pride she felt in hearing Dr. Thompson's praise. "They're going very well, Dr. Thompson. Thank you for asking," she replied, her voice steady and sincere. Sarah, on the other hand, looked like she might faint. Her stomach churned as she processed Dr. Thompson's words. She had just insulted the very woman who had been writing her letter of recommendation and had been silently supporting her medical ambitions. This was no longer just about spilled water or a ruined blazer. This was about her own ignorance and arrogance, and she knew it. But Dr. Thompson wasn't done yet. He continued to unfold the story of Michelle's accomplishments, and with each word, Sarah's discomfort grew. "Let me tell you about the young woman you just humiliated," Dr. Thompson said, his voice firm but calm. He was no longer speaking just to Sarah. His words were directed at everyone in the restaurant, ensuring that they understood the full scope of what had just transpired. "The same woman whose competence you questioned, whose worth you dismissed based on her current job. Michelle Williams maintains a 4.0 GPA in pre-med while working full-time here at Riverside Cafe. She volunteers 20 hours a week in our pediatric ward, bringing comfort to sick children. Last month, she organized a fundraiser that raised over $50,000 for children's cancer research." Tom, the new employee at Premier Marketing Solutions, looked at his boss with disappointment. He had joined the company because of its supposed commitment to diversity and inclusion, but now, in the face of Dr. Thompson's revelations, he was seeing the truth behind the glossy brochures and polished presentations. The company he had joined was not the place he had thought it was. Sarah, still struggling to regain some control over the situation, tried to deflect. "This isn't about her education or volunteer work," she said, her voice faltering slightly. "This is about professional service standards." "Professional standards?" Dr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, his expression cool and unflinching. "Let's talk about professional standards, Miss Chin," he said. "In the past 15 minutes, I've witnessed you make assumptions about someone's worth based on their job, imply racial bias in service, and create a hostile environment in a public space. Are these the professional standards your company plans to bring to Metropolitan Health Network?" Michelle had returned to the table, her hands steady as she set down Dr. Thompson's coffee. "Thank you, Michelle," Dr. Thompson said, his tone warm and appreciative. "By the way, how did your presentation on racial disparities in healthcare go last week? The board members mentioned it was quite impressive." Sarah's mouth fell open. The mention of Michelle's presentation, which she had worked so hard on, made the entire situation even more jarring. This was the woman she had so casually belittled, and now Michelle was being praised for her academic and professional achievements. "It went well, sir," Michelle replied, her smile widening slightly. "The medical board seemed very interested in my research on improving healthcare access in underserved communities." Dr. Thompson turned back to Sarah, his voice now a calm but pointed lecture. "You see, Miss Chin, Metropolitan Health Network is deeply committed to creating an inclusive environment in healthcare. We're looking for marketing partners who share these values, partners who understand that true excellence comes from recognizing and respecting the dignity of every individual." At this point, Sarah's team members were openly staring at her, the realization dawning on them that their once celebratory lunch had turned into a powerful lesson in prejudice, respect, and the consequences of quick judgments. "I didn't know," Sarah stammered, her usual confidence completely gone. "That's precisely the problem, isn't it?" Dr. Thompson replied, taking a sip of his coffee as he folded his hands on the table. "You didn't know, yet you felt entitled to make judgments. You didn't know that the woman you just berated might one day be performing surgery on your loved ones. You didn't know that the incompetent server you mocked is actually a brilliant medical student who exemplifies the values our hospital network holds dear." The lesson was clear and it resonated with everyone in the restaurant. Jenny wiped away a tear as she watched Michelle stand tall and proud. She had always known Michelle was special, but today, it was clear to everyone that she was far more than just a waitress. Dr. Thompson, however, wasn't finished. He had one final point to make, and it was one that would completely change Sarah's perspective on this entire encounter. Reaching into his briefcase, he pulled out a folder marked Metropolitan Health Network Marketing Proposals. Sarah's eyes fixed on it, knowing that the future of her company depended on the outcome of this conversation. "Miss Chin," Dr. Thompson began, opening the folder slowly, "do you know why?" The quiet hum of Riverside Cafe, usually filled with the clinking of silverware and the low murmur of conversation, had come to a standstill. The atmosphere was thick with the weight of a moment that seemed to hold the collective breath of everyone present. What had started as a minor incident, an accidental spill of water onto a designer blazer, had quickly escalated into a public spectacle that would forever change the course of several lives. At the center of it all was Michelle Williams, the young waitress who had been humiliated by Sarah Chin, the CEO of Premier Marketing Solutions. But, as fate would have it, Michelle's quiet dignity and Dr. James Thompson's timely intervention were about to turn the tables, and Sarah Chin was about to learn a lesson in leadership, respect, and the true meaning of professionalism. Dr. Thompson, the CEO of Metropolitan Health Network, had been observing the entire scene from his nearby table. He had seen Sarah's arrogance, her condescending remarks, and her complete disregard for Michelle's humanity. But he had also witnessed Michelle's grace under pressure, her unwavering professionalism, and the poise with which she had handled the situation. Now, as he stood up and approached Sarah's table, his presence commanded attention. His stature, calm demeanor, and the quiet authority that radiated from him made it clear that Sarah's world was about to change. "I believe we have a meeting scheduled for next week about your company handling our marketing needs," Dr. Thompson said, his voice smooth and measured, but carrying an underlying weight of authority. Sarah's eyes widened as she looked at the business card he handed her, her fingers trembling as she read it. For a moment she was completely speechless. Her mind was racing, trying to process the fact that the man standing before her was the very CEO she had been trying to impress. This was the man whose company she had been courting for months, hoping to secure a lucrative contract for her agency. The color drained from Sarah's face, and her carefully constructed facade of confidence began to crack. Her heart raced in her chest as she realized the full scope of the situation. She had just publicly humiliated the very person who had been quietly supporting her career aspirations. Her arrogant outburst and dismissive treatment of Michelle had likely cost her the one opportunity that could make or break her company's future. And now, the man she had hoped would be her client was not only witnessing her behavior, but he was also about to expose it for what it truly was. But Dr. Thompson wasn't finished. He had more to say, and Sarah was about to learn that true leadership wasn't about titles or accomplishments, it was about integrity, respect, and the ability to recognize the humanity in others, no matter their position in life. "Michelle," Dr. Thompson began, turning to the young waitress with a warm smile, "how are your medical school applications coming along? The letter of recommendation I wrote for you highlighted your exceptional work in our pediatric volunteer program. Your ability to handle difficult situations with grace and professionalism is exactly what we look for in future doctors." The restaurant went completely silent. Every eye in the room turned toward Michelle, and for the first time, the full extent of her dignity and accomplishments were being recognized. The weight of Dr. Thompson's words hit Sarah like a wave. She had just berated a woman who wasn't just a waitress but a future doctor, a volunteer who had earned the respect of one of the most powerful healthcare leaders in the country. Michelle, ever composed, smiled faintly at the praise, though she remained professional and poised. "They're going very well, Dr. Thompson. Thank you for asking," she said, her voice steady despite the storm that had been brewing just moments before. Sarah, on the other hand, looked as if the floor had dropped out from beneath her. Her carefully crafted exterior was crumbling, piece by piece. The realization that she had just insulted the very person who had been supporting her medical ambitions, someone who was more than just a waitress, was overwhelming. But Dr. Thompson wasn't done yet. "Let me tell you more about Michelle," he continued, his voice firm and steady. "Michelle Williams maintains a 4.0 GPA in pre-med while working full-time here at Riverside Cafe. She volunteers 20 hours a week in our pediatric ward, bringing comfort to sick children. Last month, she organized a fundraiser that raised over $50,000 for children's cancer research." Sarah's new employee, Tom, looked at her with a mixture of disappointment and disbelief. He had joined Premier Marketing Solutions because he believed in the company's stated values of diversity and inclusion, but what he had witnessed today had shattered that ideal. He couldn't reconcile the company's polished image with the reality of what he had seen in Sarah's treatment of Michelle. Dr. Thompson smiled at Tom's courage, nodding at the young man. "That's exactly the kind of honest feedback organizations need to grow," he said before turning his attention back to Sarah. "Miss Chin," Dr. Thompson said, his tone now even more deliberate, "you have some serious thinking to do about leadership, respect, and true professional standards. You see, Metropolitan Health Network serves people from all walks of life. Our patients come from every background imaginable. We need partners who genuinely understand and respect that diversity." As Sarah absorbed Dr. Thompson's words, she could feel the weight of her actions pressing down on her. She had spent so much time focusing on appearances, on creating a successful brand, but she had lost sight of the true values that made a company truly great. It wasn't about glossy marketing campaigns or promises of inclusion, it was about how you treated people, especially those who didn't have the power to fight back. Dr. Thompson continued, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "But if you want to make this right, you'll have to do more than just apologize. You'll have to change your approach to leadership. You'll have to show that you understand the importance of respect, dignity, and humility." Just then, Michelle returned to their table, her tray laden with desserts for another group of customers. She moved with quiet grace, her professionalism evident in every step. Sarah's team members watched her with new eyes, seeing the young woman they had once judged as just a waitress in an entirely new light. They saw someone who was not only a medical student and volunteer but a community leader, a future doctor, and a woman who had earned the respect of one of the most influential people in healthcare. Dr. Thompson, sensing the moment was right, turned to Sarah. "Let me tell you something else about Michelle," he said. "Michelle is the creator of a groundbreaking program that helps minority students prepare for medical school. The program has already helped 30 students from underprivileged backgrounds gain admission to top medical schools. In fact, the board was so impressed with her work that we're implementing it across all our hospital networks. We're going to need a marketing team to help promote it nationwide." Sarah sank further into her chair as the gravity of Dr. Thompson's words settled in. The restaurant had grown eerily quiet, every diner, every staff member, and every employee listening intently as Dr. Thompson continued his lecture. Michelle, the woman she had so callously humiliated, was now a force for change, a community leader whose work was being recognized and implemented on a national scale. And Sarah, the CEO who had tried to belittle her, was now faced with the reality of her own actions. Dr. Thompson closed his folder slowly, locking eyes with Sarah. "The question, Miss Chin, is what are you going to do about what happened here today?" he asked, his voice calm but piercing. Sarah looked around the room at her team members, their faces filled with disappointment and shame, at the other customers who were now quietly observing her, and finally at Michelle, who stood tall and poised despite everything. She realized that this moment was a turning point, not just for her company but for her as an individual. What she said next would determine the course of her future, and the future of her business. After a long, heavy silence, Sarah took a deep breath and stood up slowly. Her voice, when it came, was unsteady and filled with vulnerability. "Michelle," she said, her voice cracking, "could you please stay for a moment? I have something to say." Michelle, ever gracious, nodded and stood quietly, her notepad still in hand. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting for Sarah's next words. I am deeply ashamed of my behavior today," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "There's no excuse for how I treated you." For the first time in her career, Sarah found herself struggling to find the words she needed. The confident, hard-edged CEO who had built her company from the ground up was now facing a truth she had been unwilling to see until this moment. "I grew up poor," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "My parents were immigrants who worked in restaurants just like this one. I remember them coming home exhausted, sometimes crying because of the way they were treated by customers. Somewhere along the way, after I became successful, I forgot where I came from. I became the exact kind of person my parents used to warn me about." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, and for the first time, her armor cracked. Tom, the new employee, quietly handed her a napkin, his gesture one of support and understanding. Her team members, who had never seen this vulnerable side of their boss, looked at her with surprise and confusion. "You're absolutely right," Sarah continued, turning to Dr. Thompson. "Today proved that we've been paying lip service to diversity and inclusion. But if you'll give me a chance, I want to make this right." She reached for her designer purse and pulled out her phone, her hands still trembling. "First," she said, her voice steadying, "I'm calling our HR department right now, on speakerphone, to authorize an immediate review of our hiring practices and company culture." The moment was charged with a new energy, a sense of accountability, and a resolve to change that no one in the room could deny. What would happen next would depend on whether Sarah could follow through with her words and prove that her apology wasn't just an attempt at damage control, but a genuine commitment to change. As Sarah spoke, her voice trembled, barely above a whisper, while she addressed her HR director on the phone about launching a complete cultural audit. The weight of the situation was not lost on her. She had seen her own arrogance laid bare, and now she was forced to confront the reality of her actions. Michelle, who had endured the brunt of her humiliation earlier, began to step away from the table to check on her other tables. However, Sarah gently stopped her, her voice soft and earnest. "Michelle," she began, "I'm not finished." Michelle, unsure of what Sarah might say next, hesitated but then stood still, waiting. After ending the call with HR, Sarah took a deep breath, her shoulders rising as she straightened her posture. There was a moment of stillness as Sarah gathered her thoughts. She had spent years building her company into a successful marketing firm, but everything she had worked for now seemed secondary to the lesson she had learned in this restaurant. A lesson in humanity, respect, and leadership. "I understand if you can't forgive me," Sarah continued, her voice cracking slightly, "but I want you to know that your dignity and professionalism in the face of my horrible behavior has taught me a lesson I'll never forget." She paused, swallowing hard as she looked at Michelle, hoping her words would be received as more than just a fleeting apology. Dr. Thompson, ever the professional and mentor, leaned forward, intrigued by the transformation unfolding before him. It was clear that this was a pivotal moment, not just for Sarah but for her entire company. "Actions speak louder than words, Miss Chin," Dr. Thompson said calmly, his gaze never leaving Sarah's face. "What exactly do you plan to do?" The question hung in the air and Sarah's mind raced. She had just spent the last few minutes apologizing, but now she understood that her words needed to be backed up with actions. Sarah took another steadying breath, and as she straightened her shoulders, she knew that what she was about to say would define not just the future of her company but her personal growth as well. "First," Sarah began, "I want to make a donation to Michelle's medical school preparation program. Not as a bribe or to save face, but because it's clearly making a real difference in people's lives." Her eyes met her marketing team's, her gaze firm. "This is not just charity, this is an investment in the future of our society, in the people who will go on to change the world. I want to contribute to that in a meaningful way." There was a murmur of approval from the team members who had witnessed the transformation in Sarah. For the first time, they saw their leader take responsibility for her actions and demonstrate the kind of commitment to change that they hadn't believed possible. The restaurant, which had once been filled with tension, now buzzed with a cautious optimism. Second, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with conviction, I am announcing right now that our company will offer 5 paid internships specifically for students from Michelle's program who are interested in marketing and business. She paused for a moment to let the gravity of her words settle in. It's not enough to just provide opportunities. We need to provide real, tangible pathways for these students to succeed. Jenny, one of the team members from Sarah's marketing department, wiped away happy tears as she watched the woman she had once seen as arrogant and out of touch speak with such humility and resolve. Jenny had witnessed firsthand how Michelle's program had changed lives, and now, the person who had once been blind to the importance of such programs was championing them. Third, Sarah said, her voice now steady and resolute, I would like to volunteer my own time, if Michelle and Dr. Thompson permit it, to teach business skills to the students in the program. They should know how to promote and grow their future medical practices. The skills I've learned in marketing and business can be an asset to them, and I want to help them succeed. Dr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, visibly impressed but still cautious. Those are generous offers, Miss Chin, he said slowly, leaning back in his chair. But what about your own personal growth from this incident? Words are easy, but real change requires self-reflection and continued effort. Sarah nodded, understanding Dr. Thompson's concern. She had, after all, been the one who had demonstrated such a blatant disregard for Michelle's worth and had failed to see the value in the program she had so generously offered. It wasn't enough to simply make amends for today, she needed to demonstrate a commitment to her own personal growth as well. I'm also enrolling myself in sensitivity and bias training starting today, Sarah responded. I've realized that I have a lot of work to do to change my perspective and better understand the needs of the communities we aim to serve. And I'd like to share my story, my complete story including my shameful behavior today, at our next industry conference. Other CEOs need to hear this. They need to know that no one is immune from making mistakes, but what matters is how we grow from them. Michelle, who had remained quiet throughout Sarah's speech, finally spoke. Her voice was calm and steady, her words measured. Miss Chin, she began, thank you. Your words mean a lot, but you're right, actions matter more than words. She met Sarah's gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. I look forward to seeing these changes implemented. It will be a real test of your commitment to change. As these words hung in the air, a profound silence settled over the restaurant. Dr. Thompson reached again for his folder containing the marketing contract, and everyone held their breath, wondering if Sarah's genuine remorse and concrete actions would be enough to save her company's biggest opportunity. The next words out of Dr. Thompson's mouth would determine not just the fate of Premier Marketing Solutions but also the sincerity of Sarah's transformation. Dr. Thompson looked at the marketing contract in his hands, then back at Sarah Chin. He had seen countless business leaders in his lifetime, and he had witnessed both their successes and their failures. In his 30 years of medical practice and business leadership, he had learned that the true character of a person wasn't revealed in their successes but in how they handled their mistakes. Miss Chin, Dr. Thompson began slowly, his voice calm yet firm, your behavior earlier today was completely unacceptable. A collective tension ran through the room as everyone awaited his judgment. However, your response to being confronted with that behavior has been interesting. He turned to Michelle. What do you think, Michelle? You're the one who was directly affected by Miss Chen's actions. Michelle straightened her apron, her posture exuding the same calm professionalism she had demonstrated throughout the entire ordeal. In the hospital, Dr. Thompson, we often see people at their worst moments, she said, her voice steady. What matters is not that they made a mistake, but how they choose to learn and grow from it. She looked at Sarah, who was waiting for her judgment. Miss Chen's offer seemed genuine, and her programs could help many students achieve their dreams. The restaurant manager, Marcus, stepped forward, his voice strong as he added his own thoughts. If I may add something, Dr. Thompson, he said. In all my years running this restaurant, I've never seen someone transform from such arrogance to genuine humility in one afternoon. It's quite remarkable. Dr. Thompson nodded thoughtfully, considering the weight of the situation. Then after a long pause he made his decision. Here's what we're going to do, he announced, his voice steady. Metropolitan Health Network will still consider Premier Marketing Solutions for our contract, but with conditions. Sarah's face lit up with hope, and her team members let out sighs of relief. This wasn't the end of the road, it was a chance for redemption. First, Dr. Thompson held up one finger, everything you've promised today must be implemented within 30 days. The donations, the internships, the volunteer work, all of it? Absolutely, Sarah agreed immediately, her voice filled with determination. I'll have my team start working on it today. Second, Dr. Thompson continued, "You will work directly with Michelle to develop the business education component of her medical preparation program. Your marketing expertise could genuinely help future doctors succeed." Michelle nodded in agreement, her face expressing the grace she had shown throughout the afternoon, despite the hurt Sarah had caused her just hours before. "Third," Dr. Thompson's voice grew more serious, "you will submit monthly reports to our board showing the concrete steps your company is taking to improve its culture and diversity practices. We don't want just words on paper. We want real change." Tom, Sarah's new employee, spoke up again, his voice filled with sincerity. "Dr. Thompson, as the newest team member, may I volunteer to help write those reports? I want to make sure we're truly holding ourselves accountable." Dr. Thompson smiled warmly at Tom. "Excellent suggestion, young man. In fact, I'd like you to lead this initiative." Sarah looked at Tom with newfound respect, realizing that her company needed more employees like him, willing to speak up for what was right. Finally, Dr. Thompson pulled out a pen. "You will personally apologize to every member of your staff here today," he said. "They witnessed their leader behave in a way that contradicted everything your company claims to stand for." Sarah turned to her team immediately, her face filled with remorse. "I am deeply sorry for putting you all in this position," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "You deserve better leadership today. I promise to do better going forward." Dr. Thompson watched as this scene unfolded, his expression thoughtful as he observed Sarah's commitment to change. He had witnessed many leaders in his time, but few had demonstrated such humility and willingness to change. It was now up to Sarah to prove that her transformation was more than just a momentary lapse in judgment. 1 year later, the Riverside Cafe was a scene of celebration, its atmosphere filled with joy and excitement. The restaurant had been transformed for the occasion, with balloons and a banner reading, "Congratulations Dr. Michelle Williams," adorning the walls. It was a private celebration, attended by hospital staff, medical students and familiar faces from that unforgettable day. The guests chatted happily, sharing stories and catching up, but it was clear that the central figure of this gathering was Michelle. Michelle stood at the center of the room, a proud smile on her face as she wore her graduation gown, her medical degree in hand. She was surrounded by friends, family and well-wishers, all of them beaming with pride. Among them was her mother, who had worked double shifts for years to support her daughter's dreams. Today, the tears in her mother's eyes were tears of joy as she watched her daughter, who had once balanced medical school volunteer work and waiting tables at the Riverside Cafe, now graduate with the honor of becoming a doctor. The road had been long and challenging, but Michelle had made it. Her mother's tears were a testament to the incredible sacrifices that had gone into making this moment possible. "I can't believe how much has changed in just 1 year," Jenny said as she served champagne to the guests. Jenny had worked at the cafe alongside Michelle, and now, 1 year later, she was the head waitress, a role she had earned after Michelle left the restaurant to focus on her medical residency. Jenny had always admired Michelle's dedication and strength, and now she could proudly say that Michelle's journey had inspired her to push harder for her own success. Dr. Thompson, who had been instrumental in Michelle's growth and development throughout her career, stood up to make a speech. As he looked around at the gathered crowd, he smiled, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "When I first met Michelle," he began, "she was balancing medical school volunteer work and waiting tables with incredible grace. Today, she's not only a doctor, but she's also the director of our hospital's community medical education program." The crowd erupted in applause, but Michelle blushed, her face turning a shade of pink at the praise. Her program, which aimed to help underprivileged students pursue careers in medicine, had grown far beyond anyone's expectations. It was a testament to Michelle's tireless dedication and the lasting impact of the work she had done to support aspiring doctors from disadvantaged backgrounds. As the applause died down, the door to the restaurant opened, and Sarah Chin, the CEO of Premier Marketing Solutions, entered the room carrying a large gift box. She looked different from the last time Michelle had seen her. Her designer clothes were still elegant, but they were less flashy now. Her appearance reflected a subtle but noticeable shift in her character. Gone was the arrogant, distant leader who had once humiliated Michelle. In her place was a woman who exuded warmth and genuine respect. The transformation in Sarah was not just superficial. It had been earned through hard work, self-reflection, and a deep commitment to making amends for her past mistakes. "I hope I'm not too late," Sarah said, walking up to Michelle. "My diversity council meeting ran long. We were finalizing the details for next year's internship program." She held the gift box out toward Michelle with a sincere smile. The room, filled with familiar faces, turned to Sarah, curious about her presence at the celebration. Michelle, her smile still radiant, greeted Sarah warmly. "You're just in time," she said. "I was about to tell everyone about our latest success." Tom, who was now Premier Marketing's head of diversity and inclusion, stepped forward with a presentation board. His excitement was palpable as he spoke to the gathered crowd. "Thanks to our joint business education program," he announced, 80% of Michelle's medical students now graduate with basic business and marketing skills. They're better prepared to run their own practices and serve their communities. The room burst into applause as the results of the partnership between Michelle's program and Sarah's company were celebrated. Dr. Thompson, standing at the front of the room, watched proudly as Sarah and Michelle stood side by side, a powerful symbol of growth, mutual respect, and change. Their collaboration was more than just a professional success. It represented the incredible personal transformations that both women had undergone. "I have an announcement too," Sarah said, opening the gift box she had brought with her. Inside was a framed magazine cover featuring Michelle's medical program, with Michelle's face proudly displayed as the face of the campaign. Premier Marketing Solutions is launching a nationwide campaign to support medical education for underprivileged students, Sarah said, her voice filled with excitement. "And guess who's the face of the campaign?" Michelle's mother, who had been quietly watching the festivities, began to cry again when she saw her daughter's picture on the magazine cover. Marcus, the restaurant manager who was still with the company, quickly handed her a tissue. "But that wasn't all," Sarah continued, her smile widening. "That's not all. Our company is creating a full scholarship fund. Every year, 5 students from Michelle's program will receive full medical school scholarships. We're calling it the Riverside Scholars Program, to never forget where this journey began." Michelle's mother's tears flowed even more freely as she realized just how far her daughter had come. From struggling to make ends meet to seeing her daughter's name on the cover of a national magazine and knowing that 5 future doctors would benefit from the Riverside Scholars Program every year, the magnitude of the impact Michelle had made was impossible to ignore. As the evening continued, the celebration carried on, with young waiters and waitresses currently working through school coming to Michelle for advice and encouragement. They saw in Michelle a role model, someone who had made it against all odds and was now giving back to help others achieve their dreams. Sarah's marketing team members, who had witnessed her own transformation, shared stories about how the company had changed for the better. They spoke with pride about the initiatives Sarah had implemented, about the cultural audit that had completely redefined the company's work environment, and how they had seen firsthand the positive impact of Sarah's efforts to make amends and lead with integrity. As the night wound down, Michelle found a quiet moment with Dr. Thompson and Sarah. They sat together, reflecting on how far they had come in such a short time. "You know," Michelle said, her voice thoughtful, "that difficult day turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Look how many lives we've changed together." Sarah nodded, her expression reflective. "I keep that water-stained blazer in my office as a reminder," she admitted. "Whenever I'm tempted to judge someone or act superior, I look at it and remember the lesson I learned here." Dr. Thompson, who had witnessed so many of their personal transformations, smiled at both women. "Sometimes," he said, his voice warm with wisdom, "the best doctors and the best leaders are not created in classrooms or boardrooms, but in moments that test our character. You both passed that test." As the evening came to a close, Michelle took one last look around the Riverside Cafe. The table where everything had happened, the confrontation with Sarah, the pivotal moment that had changed their lives, was now covered with celebration gifts and cards. The spot where she had stood, holding back tears during Sarah's tirade, was now the place where she stood as Dr. Michelle Williams, ready to help others achieve their dreams. The story of the boss lady and the black waitress had evolved into something far more significant than a tale of humiliation and redemption. It had transformed into a powerful reminder that change is possible, that second chances matter, and that dignity can triumph over discrimination. Most importantly, it showed that sometimes, life's hardest moments can lead to its greatest victories.